Lila Morgan never believed in haunted toys, and her best friend, Ethan Cross, thought dolls were harmless, until the day they discovered the Labubu doll sitting alone on a dusty shelf. Its stitched smile was innocent at first, but soon, every corner of their world twisted into darkness, and what they thought was just a toy became something far more sinister. I used to think horror stories about cursed toys were nothing more than campfire tales, made to scare children into behaving. I never gave much thought to the idea that something lifeless could carry an energy of its own. But the day I stumbled into that strange antique shop changed everything. It was on a street I'd never walked before, tucked between two buildings that looked abandoned. One was boarded up with peeling paint, the other sagged as if it might collapse with the next gust of wind. The shop seemed out of place, too narrow, like it had been squeezed in unnaturally, almost as if it wasn't supposed to be there at all. The windows were grimy, and no sign hung above the door. I don't know why I even pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled of dust and something faintly sour, like damp cloth that had never dried. Shelves stretched into shadows, filled with objects that seemed forgotten by time-rusty clocks, cracked picture frames, faded postcards, and dolls that slumped as though sleep had taken them decades ago. My footsteps creaked on the uneven floorboards, and though the shop was silent, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every object seemed to lean toward me, watching. That's when I saw it. On the top shelf, half hidden behind a cracked porcelain vase, sat the Labubu doll. Its fur was grayish, not quite soft, more like the worn texture of something that had been handled too many times. Its oversized ears curved upward, exaggerated and cartoonish, but they gave it the look of something listening, as if it could hear the smallest breath I took. Its eyes weren't glassy like other dolls. They were black, deep, and seemed to catch the light in a way that made them glimmer with life. And then there was the smile stitched in thick black thread. The grin curved too far, sharp in a way that felt mocking. It was frozen in joy, but the longer I looked, the more it felt like something cruel was hidden behind that smile. I don't know why I reached for it. My fingers brushed against its rough fabric, and a chill shot down my spine as though I'd touched something living. The moment I pulled it down from the shelf, the air seemed to shift, the draft growing colder. I glanced around for the shopkeeper, but no one was there. The counter at the back sat empty, the register closed, as if the place wasn't run by anyone at all. For a moment, I thought about putting the doll back, but a strange heaviness pressed down on me, an urge I couldn't explain. Before I knew it, I was carrying the doll out of the store. I don't remember paying, I don't remember hearing the door shut. It was as if the world outside the shop blurred for a moment, and when I came back to myself, I was already walking down the street with the doll in my arms. When I got home, I placed the Labubu doll on my dresser, telling myself it was just a harmless collectible. Yet as the hours passed, I found my eyes drawn to it again and again. The stitched grin seemed to shift when I wasn't looking, the black thread pulling tighter, wider, as though it had stretched. By nightfall, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made a mistake. I tried to sleep, but the darkness felt heavier than usual. Every time I rolled over, I swore I could feel the doll's gaze following me. I pulled the blanket over my head, but the image of its wide grin and endless black eyes stayed burned in my mind. My chest tightened with unease, but exhaustion eventually dragged me under. Morning came with a shock that rattled me to the core. I opened my eyes to find the doll no longer on the dresser where I'd left it. My breath caught as my gaze swept the room. It was sitting neatly on my pillow, only inches from my face. Its smile seemed closer now, so close it felt as if it had leaned in during the night, watching me breathe. I sat frozen that morning, staring at the Labubu doll perched on my pillow. Its stitched grin seemed almost triumphant, as though it knew I had noticed its little trick. My pulse thudded so violently in my chest I thought I might faint. For long minutes I didn't dare move, afraid that if I shifted it might move too. Finally, with trembling hands, I picked it up and placed it back on the dresser, this time turning it so that it faced the wall. I tried to laugh at myself, tried to believe that in my half-asleep state, I must have placed it beside me without realizing, but no matter how many times I repeated that excuse in my head, it felt hollow. All day the thought of the doll clung to me like a shadow. At work, at the store, even on the bus, I caught myself picturing those deep black eyes and that too wide grin. Every time I remembered waking up with it next to me, a shiver crawled down my spine. By the time I got home that evening, the air inside my apartment felt different, heavier, like the walls themselves had absorbed something unnatural. The doll still sat where I had left it, facing the wall, but I could almost feel its presence stretching through the room. That night, I was restless. Sleep came in fragments, broken by jolts of unease. Around midnight I woke suddenly, my ears straining. There was a sound faint, dragging like fabric brushing across wood. I held my breath and listened. The noise came again, closer this time, as though something small was crawling along the floor. My body locked in place. My eyes slowly adjusted to the pale glow of moonlight spilling through the curtains, and that's when I saw it. The Labubu doll was no longer on the dresser. It stood upright on the floor near the corner, its head tilted, ears stretched upward like twisted shadows. The sight sent a spike of terror through me. My mind screamed to move, to grab it, to throw it out, but I couldn't. I was frozen, my chest tight with panic. my limbs numb as if pinned beneath invisible hands. I blinked hard, hoping the image would disappear, that my tired brain was only tricking me. But when my eyes opened, the doll was no longer in the corner. It was closer now, standing at the edge of the bed. Its grin appeared wider, as if the threads themselves had stretched while I wasn't looking. The room was silent, except for the pounding of my heart. My breath came shallow and quick, every exhale a whisper against the thick stillness. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying that when I opened them the nightmare would be over. I told myself if I could just hold still long enough, morning would come and everything would be normal again. I don't remember falling asleep, but somehow the night passed. When I woke, sunlight filled the room, and the doll was back on the dresser, sitting in the exact same spot where I had placed it before. For a moment, relief washed over me, but it didn't last long. My eyes drifted downward, and that's when I saw them. Scratches. Dozens of tiny claw-like scratches marked the wooden floor, leading straight from the dresser to the side of my bed. Some were shallow, others dug deep into the wood, as though something had dragged itself slowly across the floor during the night. My stomach twisted violently. These marks weren't a dream. They were real, etched into the wood as proof of what had happened. I backed away, my bare feet brushing against the grooves. A chill raced through me at the thought of those tiny hands scraping along the floorboards, inching closer while I slept. The air felt colder, heavier, as if the doll-esque grin stretched far beyond the threads of its face and into the atmosphere of the room itself. I tried to tell myself to get rid of it, to throw it outside, to smash it if I had to, but something deep inside me resisted. A heavy, suffocating dread pressed down on me, convincing me that doing so would make things worse. It wasn't just a toy anymore. It was something that had chosen me. As the morning light shifted and the scratches on the floor glistened in its glow, one thought burned in my mind with dreadful clarity. The Labubu doll didn't want to be thrown away. It wanted to be closer. The scratches on the floor stayed with me all day. No matter what I did, my mind replayed the image of those jagged grooves cutting across the wood like evidence of something alive, something that had crawled toward me while I lay defenseless. I told myself I couldn't live like this. The doll had to go. I couldn't explain why I hadn't already thrown it away, why I had hesitated even after seeing proof that it moved on its own. It was as if the thing had burrowed into my thoughts, whispering that discarding it would be dangerous. Still, I convinced myself I was stronger than a toy. That evening, when the sun slipped low and the shadows of my apartment stretched across the walls, I grabbed a trash bag. My hands trembled as I shoved the Labubu doll inside, careful not to look into its face for too long. I tied the bag tightly, the knot cutting into the plastic, and carried it down 3 flights of stairs to the dumpster behind my building. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the doll grew denser in my arms, pressing down on me. At the dumpster, I flung the bag in, slammed the lid shut, and walked quickly back without looking over my shoulder. A weight lifted slightly as I entered my apartment. For the first time in days, the air didn't feel so suffocating. I told myself it was over, that I had done the right thing. I tried to eat dinner, to relax on the couch, to enjoy the faint sound of traffic outside. For a few hours I almost believed the nightmare had ended. But when I opened my apartment door to head to bed, my blood turned to ice. The Labubu doll was sitting in the hallway. Not in a trash bag, not dirty from the dumpster, just sitting upright in the middle of the floor, its oversized ears stretched upward, its stitched grin gleaming in the faint light. My breath caught in my throat, my knees nearly buckled. The doll was supposed to be blocks away, buried under garbage, but it was here, waiting for me as if it had beaten me back. The silence around it was thick. I couldn't hear the city outside anymore, couldn't even hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. My whole world had shrunk into the few feet between me and the doll. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My lips parted, but all I could manage was a shaky exhale. The air grew colder. My lights flickered once, twice, then steadied, casting long shadows across the walls. The Labubu doll didn't move, but I could feel something radiating from it, like a presence. Like it wasn't sitting there at all, but standing over me, pressing down on my chest. I forced myself to step forward, just enough to close the door behind me. My eyes never left the doll. Its stitched grin looked wider now, stretched so far it seemed impossible that thread alone held it together. My stomach turned. I could almost hear it, a faint tugging sound, as though the thread was straining, splitting, preparing to unravel into something worse. Then I noticed the wall behind it, scratches, fresh ones, long lines carved deep into the paint, slashing in uneven patterns. My heart hammered as I squinted, realizing they weren't random. The scratches were forming letters, jagged and uneven, as if clawed into the wall by something small and impatient. The word was simple, but it made my stomach lurch when I read it. Stay. The message was still unfinished, the last letter half carved, as though I had interrupted the act by coming home too soon. My chest ached as I stared at the word. The doll hadn't been thrown away, it hadn't been discarded. It had chosen me, and now it was making it clear. It wanted me here. I backed away slowly, every nerve screaming at me to run, to get out, to escape. But my legs moved as though weighed down by lead. I stumbled into my bedroom and slammed the door, pressing my back against it as though the flimsy wood could protect me. My breathing was ragged, my throat dry, but even in the silence, I could hear the faintest scratching sound, slow and deliberate, coming from just beyond the door. I didn't dare open it again. I just sat there in the dark, shaking, waiting for morning, with one sickening realization echoing through my mind. The Labubu doll wasn't going anywhere. It didn't just want to be in my home. It wanted to be closer. I barely slept after that night. Every time I drifted off, the sound of scratching would wake me again, slow and steady, like fingernails dragging across a wooden coffin. My body ached with exhaustion, but I was too terrified to close my eyes for long. By morning, my nerves were frayed, my hands trembling even as I tried to pour a glass of water. The doll sat in the living room as if it had never moved, legs stretched out, grin sharp as ever. It didn't matter where I placed it, didn't matter what I did. Somehow, it was always waiting. I decided to lock it away. I pulled open the closet door in my bedroom, pushed aside boxes of old clothes, and shoved the Labubu doll into the dark corner. I slammed the door shut and pressed my weight against it, as though I expected the thing to shove its way back out. Silence lingered. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of control. Maybe it couldn't move when contained. Maybe it needed open space to crawl closer. I told myself I could finally sleep. That night, I climbed into bed with the closet door locked and a chair wedged beneath the handle. For hours, nothing happened. The silence stretched so long it almost felt normal again. My eyelids grew heavy and I finally allowed myself to drift into sleep. Then the sound came. At first it was faint scraping, muffled, like something clawing from inside the walls. My eyes snapped open, heart thudding. The noise grew louder, sharper, as if tiny hands were raking against wood. It was coming from the closet. The chair wedged against the door rattled as the scratching continued. Relentless, like a beast caged and desperate to be free. I covered my ears with my hands, but the sound burrowed through, vibrating in my skull. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. The silence was worse than the scratching. My room felt hollow, empty, as if all the air had been sucked away. I stared at the closet door for what felt like hours, waiting for the handle to twitch or the chair to shift. But nothing happened. Exhaustion dragged me down again, and somehow, I slipped into uneasy sleep. When I awoke, the closet door stood wide open. The chair I had wedged beneath the handle lay toppled on the floor. My breath came in quick, shallow bursts, as I forced myself to look inside. The corner where I had shoved the doll was empty. The shadows in the closet seemed deeper, thicker, as if something had drained the light out of them. I staggered back, clutching the wall for balance. Later that morning, while brushing my teeth, I caught movement in the mirror. My reflection was normal at first, pale and tired, but then something shifted. My stomach dropped as I realized I wasn't alone in the glass. Perched on the sink beside me, in the reflection only, was the Labubu doll. Its ears stretched up like dark horns. Its stitched grin split wide open. The threads of its mouth were unraveling, writhing like worms twisting in black soil. I spun around, but the counter was empty. The sink was bare. I turned back to the mirror, and the doll was still there, grinning, its mouth stretching wider and wider. A sharp crack shot across the glass, spider-webbing outward, splitting my reflection into shards. In each fragment, the doll's smile grew darker, sharper, as though it was spreading through the cracks. My chest tightened. I leaned closer to the mirror, searching for any trace of my own face. But in the fractured reflection, something was wrong. My eyes weren't my own anymore. They were black, bottomless, shimmering like the doll's, and my mouth had begun to curl into the same stitched grin. I stumbled back, gasping for air, nearly tripping over myself. The mirror returned to normal in an instant, as if mocking me, as if nothing had happened at all. But the image burned in my mind. It wasn't just the doll anymore. Whatever it was bleeding into me. That night, I didn't try to sleep. I sat in the corner of the room with every light on, clutching a lamp like it could shield me. My eyes darted across the walls, the floor, the ceiling, waiting for the doll to show itself again. Hours passed, but the room remained silent. Then, just as dawn began to break, I looked down at my hands. Tiny black threads were stitched into my skin, crisscrossing along my fingers, pulling at the flesh. They hadn't been there before. My breath caught as I tugged at one of them, but it burned against my skin, tightening instead of loosening. My own hands were becoming something else, something stitched together like the grin of the Labubu doll. By the time the fifth night rolled around, I no longer knew if I was awake or dreaming. Every sound, every shadow, every flicker of light felt like the Labubu doll creeping closer. My body ached, my mind teetered on the edge of madness, and I could barely recognize my own reflection in the mirror. The threads on my fingers had grown longer, tighter, curling around the skin like tiny black worms. My chest tightened with every breath, and I could feel the doll's presence everywhere, stretching through the air, crawling along the walls, slipping into the corners. It had become more than a toy. It had become part of me. That night I stumbled through the apartment, desperate to escape the suffocating tension that had settled over every surface. The lights flickered, and the shadows danced in the corners, twisting unnaturally. I could hear it, the soft, dry laughter that I had come to recognize as the dolls, curling through the empty rooms like smoke. I tried to run, but my legs felt heavy, unresponsive, as if they were no longer mine. When I finally reached a bathroom, I froze. The mirror was cracked, the spiderweb lines forming shapes I couldn't fully decipher. The sink was filled with clumps of dirt, black and wet, smelling faintly of decay. I leaned closer, my stomach churning, and that's when I saw them. Dozens of tiny Labubu faces pressed against the glass from inside the cracks. Their eyes were the same endless black as the original dolls, their stitched grins wider than any human mouth could possibly stretch. They were looking at me, judging me, waiting. Panic surged through me. I banged my fists against the mirror, hoping to shatter it, hoping to destroy what was inside, but the glass didn't break. Instead, it pulsed, soft and pliable, as if it had turned to flesh. The tiny faces writhed, and one of the dolls began to crawl through a crack, emerging first with a single ear, then a tiny hand, then its body. The stitched grin stretched impossibly wide, as it stepped out of the mirror and onto the floor. I stumbled back, gasping, but there was no escape. The room felt smaller now, the walls leaning in, closing me off. More faces pressed through the cracks, more dolls emerging, dozens, hundreds, swarming like insects. Their stitched mouths whispered in unison, a dry, scraping chant that filled my head. "You are the doll now. You are the doll now. You are the doll now." I fell to my knees, my hands clawing at my own face as I realized the truth. The threads on my fingers were spreading, moving up my arms, weaving into my skin. My body felt tight, constricted, as if it were being sewn into a new form. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the room, absorbed by the crawling, whispering presence that now surrounded me. The dolls' grins reflected my own, now twisted, now mine. When I tried to look into the mirror again, my reflection was no longer me. It was the Labubu doll. Its stitched smile stretched wider with each blink, its black eyes shimmering in every fragment of cracked glass. My hands, my own hands, now bore the same black thread. The same rough fabric texture, as if my flesh was being replaced stitch by stitch. Panic rose, but there was nothing left to do. I had become part of it. The last thing I remember was the whispering, the scraping, the crawling, the dry laughter of countless stitched mouths surrounding me. The world narrowed into a tunnel of darkness and thread, my vision consumed by grinning black eyes, and then silence. When my apartment was discovered days later, it was empty. The windows were shut, the lights off, the place cold and silent. No one saw the dolls moving, no one heard the scratching. The Labubu doll sat on the dresser, perfectly still, its stitched grin unchanged, black eyes staring outward as though waiting. And if anyone looked closely, they might notice something new. On the mirror's cracks, a tiny handprint pressed into the glass, stitched into the reflection, as if someone or something had tried to reach out from inside. And somewhere, just beyond the edges of sight, I knew it was still watching.